Just real quick kind of introductions. I'm David Stanton. I'm actually the Executive Forum Director. I'm also work for the company that's actually sponsoring this event. And I'm also an acting CISO for a large organization in the healthcare space. Today's session is really, most importantly, about threats against us and our well-being. So what can we be doing better as individuals, as organizations, as a nation to protect ourselves from the vast number of threats that are in this space? We have state-run actors, we have hacktivists that are out there that are going after our organizations, and we have people going after our individual data. And really, the goal of this session is to be a very interactive session with the CISOs. I'm going to do a brief intro into a little bit about my sales pitch on Protiviti a bit, and then we'll introduce a little bit more on the topic. And then I'll introduce our CISOs who have come from their organizations, and we'll have an open roundtable discussion. A little bit about me, that I talked about the kind of roles that I play, but essentially I'll act as your moderator today for this roundtable. I've spoken in a number of different large formats. I think the largest is about 2,500 people. But I talk on multiple different topics, whether it be cloud security, third-party risk management, internal audit space, as well as the cyber threats in the area. So if you want to actually talk to me or introduce yourself, feel free to look me up in LinkedIn. I'm always willing and interested in talking about kind of the current topics and cyber threats and such. So keep it short. A little bit about Protiviti, just at a high level, who we are. We're in 35% of Fortune 1,000 organizations, global 500 companies. We do really three major areas in association with what we do work in the IT consulting. Basically, we do consulting around the business. We do consulting around IT security. We do consulting around kind of managing applications, and that's in the consulting space, but we also have internal audit, risk management, a wide range of activities. We're the largest QSA organization out there if there are people interested in the retail side of things. So we'll kind of go real quick, briefly into the topic at hand. So cyber threats really have become more and more kind of prevalent in recent times. We probably started a while back with the threat hackers kind of going on what was called Night Dragon, where essentially they revolved around the various industries, and Mandiant released some information around the APT threat that was happening in that area. Essentially what a cyber threat is just as it kind of says, is that it's really kind of a formalization of the hacks that are happening in the space. It's people getting together and kind of like social groups and really going after whoever their attacker is. And really what this means is they're operating this as a machine. Whether it's a state-run hacktivist organization or it's hackers for hire, this is becoming more and more mature, and they're really going after organizations very actively. So what's the kind of rule of thumb around this? So really the rule of thumb is that if it's important to you or to your company, it's going to be of value to somebody else. So they're going to try to go after anything that they can monetize, anything that they could potentially do harm with. So at a high level, the goal is to monetize, get kind of money out of it, to kind of create anti-competition, potentially to basically go after the target and do some type of harm or impact to them or company. So how does the story work typically? Some people don't have the background in security. We like to introduce how it typically works, but The initial compromise oftentimes comes from a phishing attack or from a vulnerability scan where they identify a vulnerability and compromise the environment. So they initially compromise the environment. They typically establish a foothold, so they get command level access back to themselves in some form or fashion, where it might be limited in nature. They escalate privilege within that solution, and then begin to move laterally. So whether that means gaining domain level access to compromising databases to really going after the keys to the kingdom for that organization, or whatever they're trying to monetize. The goal is, of course, to maintain presence. So they make it very ingrained in the actual systems that they're out there, so that essentially, if you stop one compromise throughout the environment, they have alternative paths, so that just because you turn that down doesn't mean that you're still not out of the woods. And then they complete the mission. So they monetize it, they steal your information, and a lot of times they like to also be very covert, right? So in the largest hacks that I've ever seen, usually they're in for a period of a day or two, and they know exactly what they're going to do. They create like a project plan around it, and they're in and out, and when the actual compromise occurs within hours. So you can talk about the Royal Bank of Scotland hack that happened back in 2007, 2008 timeframe. They were able to compromise the back-end database. All prepaid credit cards were compromised as part of that. They increased the limits within a period of 10 minutes, and they actually had hackers give it to a third party that went out and stole from ATM machines. And literally, they didn't know about it until the actual fraud in the bank situation actually happened. So very organized in nature, get in, get out, monetize it as quickly as possible. But that kind of doesn't go to good diligence, because these hacks are happening in healthcare, they're happening across all platforms, whether it be the governmental side and the nuclear regulatory area, or the utility side. So essentially they're going across almost all areas and all industries. Just a real quick highlight of who they are and what they're trying to, so who are the victims? Large organizations are usually the large one. This is based upon 2014 statistics from Verizon report. Financial institutions, because it's an easy way to monetize it. Retail is probably in that territory too, in the largest. I think we've seen some transition also. We've got the healthcare space that's really, from a maturity perspective, probably lower on the maturity around security. So they're an easy target. So there's a lot of focus on them right now. So how the breach is actually occurring. So these kind of overlap a little bit. So you wonder how do those all total up to 100? But for the most part, hacking is a good part of this. You're noticing like a little bit of a transition from the internal threat going a little bit more stable and further down. Partners are actually not a huge impact anymore, but the external hacking is continuing to increase, because what's the easiest way in the door? It's the way you're connected to the internet, right? So, and this kind of goes into who's after us, and it's typically outsiders. 90% are outsiders. We're seeing an 18% being state-affiliated actors, insiders being 13%. You see multiple parties, and then business partners seeing about 1%, which is interesting statistics. So the external threat continues to increase. The internal threat actually is decreasing slightly, while the partner side is also decreasing. So at a high level, how do you respond? And this is very high level. Awareness is ultimately kind of key. Educating your executives, educating all your personnel. You want to monitor the environment, so ensuring that nobody's actually compromised the environment, that you have good detection mechanisms, that you have great threat intelligence around the hackers, that you are blacklisting those and whitelisting the good guys. Protecting kind of goes into a little bit of that, so the protection mechanisms. whether it be people, process, technology, specifically in this area. You want to have a holistic, wide-ranging kind of technology breadth to where you can have overlapping technologies. So if one solution doesn't identify it, the other potentially can protect it. Resilience has become a real kind of big area, especially with the DDoS that have been happening with like banks and other entities. So if you tick off the bad guys, basically the easiest way to take down your e-commerce is just to DDoS you. And so you have to have a very resilient environment, and there's a number of different technologies and solutions out there. So to no avail, we'll go ahead and begin the roundtable. And I'll first start off with Parrish Gunnell. I've known Parrish for a good number of years for multiple companies that I've actually worked with. He was voted, I think, in, was it 2013, top 100 CISOs when he was back with another organization. But he is now actually the Invitation Homes CISO, a Blackstone company, where he's acting as CISO on a day-to-day basis and essentially managing this. Parrish? Come on down. Next on the list is actually Chris Ray. Chris essentially works for Epsilon, a marketing company, where they have significant, information about individuals, companies, others. So his job is ultimately to protect the assets in that area. So he's got a very daunting job, and he's ex-military and has an extensive background in cyber threats and attacks basically against individuals and organizations. Chris. And we've also got Ron Maring. Ron Maring is essentially Texas Health Resources Chief Information Security Officer, Senior Director. Some of his accolades, and he was naming off too many, but he's actually been the CSO magazine, or CISO magazine, where he was, is that right, CISO or CISO? CSO 50, top 50 CISOs award for the second time. So for being aligned to the business and protecting their assets. The other one is in 2007, it was actually NSA's honorary award around individual excellence. So Ron Mary. All right. So kind of from I'll flip back to the topic so I keep everybody in line of what we're talking about. Our first topic is actually a very interesting one, and it's a broad one. We talk about kind of the cyber threats against organizations, and we recently have seen, the anthem where, 80 to 130 million records ultimately were lost for individuals. And whether it be Sony or Target, us as individuals are actually being significantly impacted. And I think that this is a very kind of growing concern that organizations so large that hold our information are not doing a really very good and diligent job of protecting it. So the threat landscape basically is continuing to evolve and become more and more aggressive, flagrantly criminal and thoughtfully covert. So the common threat actors are very sophisticated rings and syndicates, meaning we've got organizations like the Cyber Gang, Magic Kitten. These are all names for these kind of hacking groups. We've got Numbered Panda, Energetic Bear, all organizations that are built around the whole goal of compromising environments and monetizing. We've got state sponsored factions like the Syrian Electronic Army, Hidden Links, Bureau 121, Axum, as well as kind of advanced hackers for hire. So you got hackerforhire.com. You can literally go to a website and you want somebody to hack you, do it. Volts, Nora, Swag, Anonymous, just to name a few. No longer is the biggest fear of the typical kind of board member, more around the kind of disgruntled employee that goes rogue and attacks your environment. They're more concerned around the cyber threat with somebody, either somebody saying that's inappropriate, saying the wrong thing that pisses off the wrong people, and they essentially come after you from an organization perspective. But it's really not just the bots, the Trojans, the spam anymore. It's really about the consolidated effort against an organization. So, with the first question, this is a broad question for our panelists. You know, whoever wants to answer can, and we'll see who's the most talkative person. We'll see. You know, what can we be doing better as a country and as organizations to protect ourselves against these threats?
First off, is it on? Okay, there we go. How about that? Testing, 1, 2, there we go. No. All right, I'll just talk loud until it turns on. There you go. We'll get 2 of them. No, I just wanted to say first off that had to really inspire people, make them feel good after eating and everything. To hear of all the organized crime areas and all the different attacks that are coming at you and the things you face. So, you know, pump them up good on that. So, it's an issue where a lot of us, we were discussing this beforehand, where people end up, regardless of what position you're in, you end up getting this sense of being overwhelmed because there's so much coming at you, whether it's new technology or some new group or hacktivist, you know, that's doing it for some cause. But yeah, at the end of the day, they're a bunch of scumbags. And anyway, so sorry, I just had to say that. So what was the question?
Yeah, the question was, what can we be doing better as an organization to protect ourselves, or as a country also?
I was going to say higher productivity. No, just overall, especially around the countryside, you know, what can we do?
Close like this.
All right. So first off, from my personal standpoint, and this is not something that I necessarily practice, though I have high ambitions of doing more along this line, but I think that we as security professionals, and I know we have people of different talents and companies and everything here, but we have to do more to push the security in the education space. We have to be teaching the kids younger, especially around math and sciences. We get a whole discussion around that, but we have to be getting more out there. I mean, the projections of what we're facing as a country now with the open security positions and that we can't find people to fill them is certainly not good. It's good for us because, you know, it's job security, no pun intended, but just we have to be more active with the high schools and colleges and get that out there, the awareness. Take the time to actually even talk to your local schools, talk to them about, you know, ways to protect themselves online, related to them personally. I mean, that's just one small thing, but I think something we need to take time out of our schedules to do.
That's great. Ron, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, you're just going to throw it.
There you go.
Do I start off and just say China did it? Drop the mic, is that what it is? I think that's my game plan for our audit compliance committee, right? Yeah. I think from outside of the organizations, some of the things, and boy, Chris, that really captures a lot. That was really good on ensuring that we're growing people the right way to fill these very complex positions, and getting involved in that is really important. I also think that we need to continue to break down the compartmentalized communications that we have across industries. There's a lot of great examples, especially like in healthcare and how we share information between physicians to care for patients. There's a very open and collaborative kind of way they're brought up culturally to help people. And security for years, because of its origins, if you will, out of the Department of Defense and other parts of the organization, has been inherently compartmentalized, overclassified, and has really limited the ability to cross-pollinate best practices across multiple industries. And I think we need to continue, just like forums like this, continue to work down and break down these silos of communication. So best practices and all these type of things that we can do to make ourselves better across industries will grow together. In other words, we've kind of raised the boat together, right? So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Give it a shot. Sure.
So I don't have much to add. I will tell you about a couple of things. Even at the government level and the company level, there is starting to be some breakdowns from the FBI and from DHS to try and allow us as companies to start sharing information without it harming us from a political or a newspaper headline type situation. I think we have to get there at some point. It's not there yet, but there's discussions and things happening at a government level that I think will help. That being said, too, I am seeing a trend in a lot of CISOs starting to share information. They're starting to say, look, what we're doing is not rocket science, and I may see something that may pertain to you, may not, but at least the ability for me to take that information and take a look at my network and know whether or not I've got something going on is of value. There are some organizations that are starting to form, one of which that I'm involved, selflessly plug while I have the mic. There's an organization called Security Advisors Alliance, which has been created by CISOs for CISOs. There is no vendor involvement per se as far as funding or anything like that. And part of our mission is to actually go and start talking to high schools and working with small businesses and donating our time and helping them with situation, with awareness and what they can do with their systems and their computers to help make them a little bit better. We're having our first conference. Luckily, it's going to be here in Dallas in late October. And really, the agenda has been set up to help educate, not only for us to get together as CISOs and talk, but also to bring our next in command to educate them and start having them understand this is at the level that you've got to start communicating and talking and help bring them along also. So that's part of it. Okay.
I'm guessing that other mic might work.
Okay, I'll try.
We'll test it. And I think almost a little bit of a follow-up to that. What are some of the recent cyber threats that you as an organization or that you've seen within across the environment that have really made you aware of some threats out there? Oh, turn it off. There you go. We can only have one at a time. What have you seen out there that maybe executives and practitioners basically in this space should be made aware of, or that you really think are some of the threats that we should be careful of?
Hello? Okay. Okay, so just so you realize, my answer is going to be a little strange. So I came from my previous employer where we had built a fully functioning security team and had the tools and visibility to now I'm starting from scratch and building a new program for imitation homes. So they're quite different in where they were from a maturity level. At my previous employer, a lot of the stuff we were seeing, because it was a global chemical manufacturing company, a lot of it was more intellectual property. We saw some stuff where our leadership team, our executives, our CEO, CFO were being spearfished and through the email. Luckily, they had enough education to notify us. The other stuff we were seeing was a lot of sort of network intrusion type stuff. So they were trying to get across the network, trying to find data, those sorts of things. It wasn't a disruptive thing of like where systems were going down or anything, but it was more of kind of looking for other information, I think, that eventually steal some data. At Imitation Homes, it's a little bit different because we don't have the visibility yet. We're still growing and stuff. But as we're starting to turn on things, I'm seeing more and more on the endpoint. That's right now, at least, where activities I'm seeing everything from crypto locker to some really nice nasty viruses that are coming in, stealing stuff off of Outlook, address books, and we even had a case recently where an HR guy got I'm not sure where it started, but his Outlook got hacked, and he's ended up spamming a ton of people, tons of external people. So there's just some things like that, and it's every day, it seems to be a little bit of something different. A lot of the industry experts are saying a lot of social engineering, a lot of phishing continues to happen, and a lot of the malware is typically changed in some little format, so it's targeted toward your company. So there's not one thing that you can put in as
Okay. I always say we're IT or security people, not audiovisual, so that's the issue here. There's a lot of advanced stuff that's out there, and we hear about it every day. I truly believe that, if you look at HP's study that came out just recently on their cyber report, I think their stats were that 44% of the breaches that were reported in 2014 were tied to vulnerabilities that had patches that were at least 2 to 4 years old. So, and then all the top 10 breaches, there had been stuff out there. It was already existent. This wasn't some new threat or something. It's fundamental things that I still think that we tend to stray and get caught up with whatever's in the latest news and not still focus on that. Like Lombardi used to talk about the basic blocking and tackling. That's what he said you had to do with football. There's very fundamental things that we need to make sure we have covered before we start worrying about all the other advanced stuff that's out there, how they can get in. Just as Parrish is pointing out, there's no one thing. I mean, you got to do your layered controls. You got to look at what you're doing on your monitoring and your alerting, because just as some companies have found out, you can put all these tools in, but if you have someone that doesn't actually pay attention to the alert that comes through and says, hey, you got this attack coming in, then it can almost make it worse for you. So,
We'll see. All right, now I'm going to go to a different microphone to cover this. Again, we're not AV guys, so. I think you described it a little bit. You essentially say these are not new things, right? So a lot of these threats basically are fundamentals. And this probably really kind of drives into our next area is kind of the various methods of reducing exposure to these threats. And in general, it seems like there's a tool or technology out there for almost everything. And some are niche business related, some of them are security related. Many of these capabilities are gobbled up on a regular basis. So there's some business viability concerns around the tools and technologies and service providers and the hardware providers. In general, this is kind of a broad question to all the panelists. Are there cost-effective methods and solutions out there with good business viability that you've seen in organizations that work effectively?
No. It's going to be the Senate today. My assignment is the Senate, right? I think the first thing that you have to consider is that it's fundamentally, we kind of play around with this all the time, but it's really a non-technical thing first, and if you're not addressing that non-technical issue, those people issues right off the bat, and programmatically how you're going to manage threats, I think you're going to chase technology all over the place, and you're going to make some fairly significant bad decisions if you kind of chase the technology around. So when the retailers got hacked, and that kind of really set this kind of domino effect across, and we see that today with these massive breaches. We see that a few years ago, but we see it again now, the retailers, and then it's cascading now into other parts of the industry, other industries. I think one of the JCPenney, Scott Howard had mentioned, and we were talking, and he says we got to get back to blocking and tackling. And Chris had mentioned that, and he says it's not about the fancy stuff. It's not about the fancy tools and techniques. It is all about making sure you're doing the blocking and tackling those foundational things in that program the right way. Things like privileged access. If you can control that, you can control harm. I was at a wonderful, at the latest CSO 50 conference in Florida, and a great quote was the CISO told his board that he wasn't going to be able to stop a breach, but what he could do is reduce harm. And that stuck with me, saying, well, wait a minute, that actually changes the way we think about our controls and how we manage threats in our environment. So becoming more data-driven is critical. You have to be data-driven in making decisions in your environment. In other words, are your controls really working effectively or not? And how are you measuring that effectiveness? If you're not measuring your control, what good is it? It's just going to do whatever you think it's doing and bypassing everything, or maybe working well, you just don't know it. But being data-driven is critically important for managing these technologies. And then, by the way, when you get that, you can be more effectively go out and buy those things that'll matter more to the organization. And by the way, there's a nice feedback with that. It's a success thing that you build that confidence because you'll be able to measure, you'll show leadership that you're making progress, and then there's a reinvestment that happens because they show that they see the progression. So there's a nice win at the end there.
So I will disagree. So it's even building my program now. We're starting with some of the basics too, things like password policy and patching and all of those good boring things. But they are effective. I will just say that on the technology side, what the technology provides to you is visibility. It gives you the data. So I'll give you an example. For instance, putting in an internet content filtering and allowing you to see what people are actually doing at work, right? Although we get into big government discussions here, but it does give you the visibility because it now gives you the data to take to legal or HR or audit or whoever, the board, and say, look, do you really want this sort of activity going on in your environment, right? It's causing us problems, and here's why. And being able to force, so the technology gives you that visibility, but you've also got to have the process on the back end and the people looking at it, right? So you have to make decisions on what those policies are going to be for your company, right? Otherwise, you're just spending money to spend money. And without that, it doesn't give you any advantage, right? But if you're able to make the purchase, get the data, make those decisions on where you're going to be from a risk perspective for your company, then it makes your life easier. Then you can say, okay, now I can focus on X, Y, or Z because that's important to our company, and that's where we're going to put, all of our drive and focus on.
And I'll just add on that real quick. Similar to what we discussed earlier, as far as what can you do to make things better. When we speak about collaboration, and I've been doing this for quite a while, especially with the government again, I find that a lot of times people in the security community like to get together and they do more on commiserate versus really collaborate and share. And so there's things for these groups where you can actually reach out to each other and see, do you have that kind of policy or some procedure already in place? Or do you have something that is an inexpensive incident response tool? That's something that I looked at, not to start naming off, we could be all day just on that one, but this thing that we had put in, this RTIR. Who knows? Anybody know that one? Anyway, you can look up RTIR. It's I forgot what the actual RT is. But anyway, just something for tracking incidents for your SOC. Something cheap. Doesn't always have to be the most expensive thing out there.
The next question is kind of an interesting question, and it's actually directed to Ron. Have organizations kind of changed their approach around executive education, security awareness, and communication? Especially around what is publicly responded to and privately responded to, and sensitive kind of political, social, and religious question.
That was a loaded question. So the first thing I'm going to say in that is internally, when we talk about communicating well across with leadership. And we were talking a little bit about being data-driven, and I think what's an important concept there is that there's an operational context, and then there's a governance and risk context. And Chris and I were talking a little bit about this before we came in, and you have to figure out a way to make the bridge. Giving executives some very technical details around an issue is probably not going to serve you well in your program. What you do need to do is figure out what is that bridge that makes it palatable or understandable to them. And in our case, what we did is we developed a threat matrix that basically summarizes major threat areas in basically 17 or 18 key categories of threats. And when things are happening in the operational environment, all that sensor-based data, all those things that we measure to determine if something is going wrong, all those incidents, all those bad actors, they move into a matrix in which translates into some active risk management, which includes risk registry and those things that we're very familiar with on the risk management side. The key is bonding together that operational component and that governance risk component, which can be a very difficult thing to do, but having kind of that bridge where you can make them two meet together, where that operational thing is happening every day, and moving every day in a way into that governance and risk management area where it can be effectively articulated, will help your leadership teams more clearly understand what the priorities are, and what those subsequent response actions are going to have to look at. Because now you can say, here are our high risk areas, here's where the activity is happening at. But not only that, now you're preparing them on how you're going to respond when something bad happens. And by the way, because if you're carrying a lot of risk, potential for something to bad happen exponentially increases, so you have to be prepared. So it allows you to kind of walk into that. Conversations cannot be something that happens on a quarterly basis. It has to happen on a daily basis. It has to be culturally fit into the organization in a way that they understand it. In healthcare, we not only talk about confidentiality, but we also talk about safety and reliability. In our organization, the security program in 2012, my second year there, we were actually awarded the CEO's Patient Safety Award. And what that meant was the context started to change a little bit. And the leaders of the organization started to understand what that meant back out to the communities in a different way. In other words, this issues that we're having in this, what normally would be considered a very IT-centric kind of a bubble of operational activity, actually had this larger output that affected the communities that we serve and the whole reason of being here, taking care of people. And so they started to get that along the way, but that didn't happen overnight. It had to be continuously communicated at multiple levels in the organization until it became something that became a normal conversation. I always give an example of when we were sitting around the Executive Leadership Council and our Chief Financial Officer starts talking about penetration testing results. And by the way, you know you've arrived at that point. And it wasn't really too deep, but there was an actual what's going on here, how are we doing that, and what does it mean to us? And it's those type of things that lean themselves into that outward communication when something bad happens so you can prepare. And lastly, exercise, exercise, exercise. If you're not doing that internally, bringing people together and at least tabletopping the bad things that could happen, you're probably not going to be overly prepared. Have those pre-scripted things ready to go. Be ready to help out the public relations staff and the language they're going to use to communicate outward when bad things happen in your organization. It's all about being prepared and being involved in that. In another month, we're going to do an annual exercise. Internal to our organization, it involves over 100 people into our annual continuity disaster recovery. It's a cyber-based exercise where we get together and we practice this at all levels of the organization. It took multiple years to get it that way, but it's kind of got to work toward it. So that's kind of where we have been and what really works to developing those messaging.
That's a great response. Probably there are too many organizations to name that have done things in a bad way. But are there really some good examples that you've seen in organizations that have responded to a breach and that they did so appropriately? and effectively in a bad situation.
Man, I don't know that I wanted to cut the microphone on this one. So Epsilon, as many of you may know, there you go. Epsilon, as many of you may know, in 2011 had a large security incident. Luckily, or whatever, RSA happened a few days after that, so it kind of overshadowed ours. So when I was interviewed later that year to come to the company, doing the research on it, one of the things that I saw that really impressed me is there was quite a few articles out there that actually, you get the people that are going to sit there and challenge were the right controls and everything in place, but there was actually quite a few articles that said the company responded too quickly. It was too aggressive in its notification. And how often do you hear that? I mean, so to me, I think actually that's a positive thing. You want to be careful with that you don't put it out there too early and get everybody panicked and you don't have all the information together. So you got to find that balance. But the whole thing is, as far as bad news doesn't get better with age. It's one of those that you got to get the message out, communicate to your customers, and treat them as partners with you, and don't hold on to that. I think that's one of the big items. And as you were pointing out, have a plan. If you're sitting there, I don't care what controls, technology, everything else, you don't have some resemblance of an incident response plan with your senior leaders outside of IT, your legal, your corporate communications, all that, then I'd say get that first and foremost. There's plenty of templates out there. There's plenty of folks around you that would be able to help you out and share some of that. So definitely have that in place.
I'll actually throw it out to the audience a little bit around this. So we never know what we're going to get, so we'll see. Does anybody have any questions around what either their organization or what various organizations can do in reducing exposure? Any questions from the audience? Jeff?
I read an article a short time ago where it pointed out the fact that in the cases of Sony, Home Depot, Target, and J.C. Morgan Chase, the economic impact behind these attacks, the successful breaches, was essentially in the millions of dollars. And then they went on to further analyze it and came to the conclusion in the cases of all three of Sony, Home Depot, and Target, the entire cost was approximately 1% of their yearly profit. And in the case of JP Morgan Chase, it was less than 1/10 of their profit. Where's their incentive to spend any money on improving their security posture?
Okay. I'll replay that. So the question was, did the fact that the revenue is typically impacted very little in association with some of these larger breaches, what is the incentive for individuals to ensure that they're keeping the people, process, technology, and incident response at the highest levels?
So I'm not going to disagree with you. It's a struggle, and at that executive level, I think though we're going to see the tide turn a little bit. If you don't start having some due diligence, there are going to be lawsuits and they're going to start coming after the board. And actually, I think, and I can't remember which company it was, the board members are starting to be sued. And I think when you start going after their pockets, then you start getting a little bit different message. And if you don't have that due diligence and you continue to be a target, you're going to overall hurt your brand reputation in the long run, and customers will not go away, or will go away. So I do agree, like with Target, for instance, right? My wife shops there all the time, and she got a new card from her bank, and she went and shopped there again, right? I mean, this is the way it is. And I think, though, that with some of the government regulations that we're starting to hear about that could potentially get passed, I also think some of the lawsuit piece, as that starts to shake out, I think you'll see a little bit of difference. So I think some of the board members and the executives are starting to get nervous about being held personally responsible. And I think when it gets to that level, then you start seeing a little bit of difference in their ability to spend some money, because they don't want that to happen again and again. Right?
That's great. I can add to that a little bit too. I mean, I saw the most recent cyber threat breach where it was the first time I've ever heard of it, where the cyber insurance company that was supporting an organization basically pulled the sheet out, said, you didn't do your diligence, we're not going to insure you. So there were fundamental, assumptions in their agreement that you'll have storage encrypted and that certain fundamental controls will be in place. And boy, would they in a bad situation. So there's a recent announcement of like the cyber insurer actually pulling the sheet out. So.
Yeah, and again, I want to make sure I understood that right. You're saying what's the incentive when it's less than 1%?
Well, there's no financial penalty associated with it. There's no legal penalties associated with it. And they see such a tiny impact on their profit, it probably has no impact on their bonuses.
See, I'm floored by that, actually, to hear that, because I look at everything that's been in the news. I mean, Target, again, aside from the amount they had to spend on the incident response, they just had the settlement for $19 million. So if you can't sit there and rationalize that, hey, I need a couple $100,000 for some policies or some resources, be it, you can't always, the biggest thing I always hear, and I struggle with my teams on this, is I need people. And they don't write a plan. They don't articulate what they need, or they don't come up with alternatives other than just saying, I need a full-time employee. So I find that people struggle with that, but I think you've got plenty out there to incentivize them. I always say you need a little fun still in these reports. When you're putting these things out there, throw out all these stats of what's going on. When you got a CEO and board member getting fired, you got people getting sued, $19 million lawsuit and stuff like that. You got plenty to justify why you need a little bit more budget maybe, or some more resources.
Just answer there's one takeaway. If you're going to go ahead and make a business case based on the loss of revenue or something else like that, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress anymore. Financial folks are very good at building in the reserves, insurance, captives, and everything else, because they're good at it. By the way, that's their job, right? To make sure that the company stays financially sustainable over time. That is their job. And they will plan for all of this. The value proposition, which is difficult, has to be much more about the bottom line. You have to make the connection between the program and transcend it across lines to the customer, or whoever that is on the other side who owns that data. You've got to figure out a way to build a good, solid story on what that means to the organization, that hopefully you can build that empathy into it, where they start to see beyond the ledger. Okay, so and I know I'm talking a little fuzzy, but it's hard, but you got to figure out good ways to do that in your organization.
That's great. We'll just kind of go into the next agenda topic, and it's really attacks against the individual. So this is the personal aspect of it. Essentially we as individuals are becoming more and more kind of desensitized by loss of our credit cards or loss of our social security numbers, or us being slightly impacted. And essentially, whether it be our health information or our social security numbers or what have you, we've kind of become a little bit desensitized and lack of interest in what's really happening. And I think this first question really kind of goes down into, what can we be doing to protect ourselves, our families, our employees from identity theft, fraud, and loss of privacy? And this question is actually for Parrish.
Okay, so I think starting at home, right? Your router, go in, find the administrative password. Don't publish your SSID for everyone. If you look on your wireless, probably all of your neighbors have it published and see them. Change the password, make it complex. It's okay if you want to write it on a piece of paper, put it on a bulletin board, it's inside your house, right? So, but make it more difficult, just from a wireless standpoint. From the kids, I have twin girls that are 9 who are all over an iPad anytime they can get their hands on it. But I've learned, I've had to learn actually, through iTunes how to set up an account, how to control that account. They have to come to me to download games. They have to have, and I know the password, they don't. I whitelist their internet browser also on the computer too. I think Apple and Microsoft both, with the new Windows version, they've got a nice family security program built in that works really nicely. I actually get a weekly little report that tells me whether or not my girls have been on the computer or not. It takes a little time to figure out. You got to sit down and go through it, but it helps. I also have a 16-year-old exchange student staying with us who is constantly on Instagram and whatever else you want to name. And I try to give her stories about, you need to be careful, right? You're about to go into college. There are things that happen in corporate America where people have actually lost their job because they did something that they shouldn't have done. And so I try to just relate it to her that, hey, it's okay that you don't befriend everyone or that you like all their pictures. I make fun of her for taking so many selfies. And I try to tell her, look, when you put it out there, it's out there forever, right? So just be careful. And try to bring a little bit of awareness to them. So I do think from a family perspective, it is about awareness, right? It's having those discussions with your kids about, hey, there are predators out there, and there are things that you do and do not want to do, right? And that's really where I think where it goes down to.
The next question is really around the company side of protecting individuals. This question is for Chris and Ron. What are ultimately you hold a lot of sensitive information of individuals, and what are organizations like you actually doing to ensure that you're protecting that individual data?
Well, I mean, we've touched on some of this as far as the technologies and processes, and there's certainly more advanced ways to do that, and not just rely on a single tool. But so I'd say it's getting that investment, working at the identity management front, working at it at the technical controls, at the network, at the endpoint. Educate your people. Relate things more to, like when we talk about protecting yourself at home. Push things out for them. Get them free AV, even though there's the whole argument around the effectiveness of AV. Work that out so you can provide that to your employees. Get them aggressive discounts with credit monitoring. Make sure you're doing it yourself. A lot of people don't even realize you get a free credit report every year. So educate them on looking at those things and understanding how they need to build security into what their day-to-day lives are. If you can teach them how to do that at home, they'll bring it back to work. Most people just don't understand. So I think aside from investing more with the different technologies and the processes, procedures, it's also pushing that to a more personal level to the employees.
People business, and you have to be, you have to do this type of awareness in a physical way. Once a year, and that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're a significantly sized healthcare system, things like going out and talking to people can be difficult muscle movements. But one of the things that we do annually is we have during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, is our security officers for our hospitals set up tables, and they go out with the security operations staff, and they set up and pre-play nice little areas of the hospitals, and usually in front of the cafeterias. We catch them there. And we set up a booth, we set up monitors, and we stop them and talk to them. And we have nice little games to play and ask about policy, and then we give advice. And we get a lot of the questions we get from them is how can I protect myself better at home? And we answer those questions right there for them physically. We do a lot of these type of product-based training where we send out kind of an annual awareness or refresher training. Those are all great tools, but it has to be a persistent set of awareness products, awareness communication strategies that you have. We do tip sheets once a month that go out into the corporate communications monthly newsletters. We're out there physically. Our security officers are actually walking the floors in the hospital and talking to people. And I always say, get out from underneath, get out from behind your cube, and get out there to talk to people physically and answer questions. And I think you'll find that awareness will grow much quicker in the organization when you do that. It's very important.
Okay, kind of opening up that topic actually to the CISOs. Is there any questions around the protection of individual information? Brian?
No,
Another CISO.
There's no way, this is just too easy. So should I sign up for LifeLock? I get this question all the time, and I'd like to hear you guys' opinion.
They're not a customer of ours, so we can't endorse that. No, I don't know. I haven't, in all honesty, I haven't kept up with, comparing the different companies. There's certainly been a lot of controversy around LifeLock in the past, and, the guy putting social out there and his background, all that stuff. But I personally, again, don't even know what happened to them. At the end, obviously, they're still going strong enough. So, yeah, I think having something, though, regardless of whether it's LifeLock or Experian or, one of those is good.
So they're not that expensive, so if you don't have something else, right, why not? Can't hurt you most of the time, but for me personally, I don't, but I'm also with USAA, and we all know how their security is. If you can find a bank that you have reliance on, like for us, USAA is my insurance, is my banking, is my credit card, right? And they've got a great security program. They're one of the best. If you're in the security industry, you hear the word USAA, your ears perk up because you want to know what they're doing. They've been doing stuff a long time. But it can't be a bad thing. I do recommend that you check your credit every year, and make sure if you see something there, then I would invest in something like that. And from personal experience, my own parents have been victims of credit fraud, and I've seen some of the stuff they've had to go through, and it's taken them a couple of years to get things back, and they've had to switch bank accounts a couple times and stuff. So checking your credit once a year at least, and being diligent about that, I think is your very first step. And if you see something, then going back to your bank to say, look, something has happened, you need to invest in credit monitoring for me. And if they don't do it, then go to a different bank because someone else will do it.
Can I ask something real quick? I'm just curious. You have a question on here. How many people have been victims of identity theft in one way, shape, or form? Okay, so wait, leave your hands up. Okay. How many of you have some kind of active protection or something that you subscribe to make sure that you're okay? So pretty much still most of them. And that's what I was wondering, because again, it goes back, a lot of people are getting so desensitized to all this, because every other day you hear somebody else, and just like Target or something, the next day they're offering, 10, 15% off, you still shop with them, so people are seeing that sell and they go right back in.
One other comment, if you have children, definitely check theirs. I had the former CISO for the state of Texas actually told me this, and I was surprised. So a lot of cyber guys, if they can get social security numbers of your children, that is money in the bank. So they're using that to open up lines of credit. And there are stories out there where kids are starting to become of age and going to college, and they're starting to apply for student loans and finding that their credit is completely wrecked. And it's all because their social security number got stolen when they were a kid. So if you do nothing else, at least keep an eye on your children's social security numbers and run a credit report on them.
I just thought my 5-year-old wanted a Ferrari.
You had
one more question, sorry. Asia. All the people that are asking questions, I know.
Okay, this is not a question, but Credit Karma is a free one that you guys can use to monitor your credit. So if they have any alerts or anything that's kind of odd that shows up on your credit report, it'll send you an email. So that way you don't have to wait a year, you can get it immediately.
Agreed, and I have it set for my children too, just to make sure I monitor that situation too. Next agenda item is really around sensitive data generally sits almost in every organization's environment. And typically we protect the flagship applications, meaning flagship applications are, you know, if it's your EMR or it's your marketing database or your key fundamental locations and authoritative sources for data. We tend to do a very good job of protecting those, but essentially when that data gets outside of those kind of parameters, we tend to see that as leakage into other either endpoints or to the cloud or to other areas. And I think it's kind of a fundamental thing that, you know, we need to ensure that we protect data. So this kind of next topic is really around, you know, what can we be doing better at managing data and the protection mechanism around sensitive data. So this first question is actually for Parrish. How can organizations have better insight into their data usage, shared with within the organization or with the partners?
Okay, so this one's a big one. So we're going to sound like a broken record. First and foremost, it's access, right? So you've got to look at who has access and why they have access, and you've got to monitor that access. So you want to ensure that they have it because they need it. That's part of their doing their job, everyday day-to-day job. The second piece to it is a little bit, again, broken record education. Make sure that they understand what data they're dealing with and how they're using it. And then working with your business. I think this is maybe where we fall a little short, and a lot of guys are starting to get more involved and becoming more of a business leader in this respect. But working with your operational people and understanding, hey, why is it that you need this data? What are you doing with that data? Where are you putting it? Understanding their processes so that you can be an advisor to help them figure out there may be a better way to do this, right? You may have a platform that's a business analytics platform that you could put, you know, view into so that they don't actually have access to that data, but they can view that data and be able to do their job, for instance. So there are things like that that when you start getting involved operationally, that helps build your own creditworthiness as a trusted advisor too, that you actually understand and want to understand what that business process is. The next thing is on the technology side. There are starting to be some, I won't say their name. If you want to know, come and ask me afterwards. But there is a company out there that's producing a thing that looks at your email traffic and your social media traffic and has correlation and combination rules about who you're talking to, about what you're talking about, etc. It's a different platform. It's going to compete, I think, against data loss prevention type products. But it has a lot more analytical and mathematical pieces to it than that. And it's a pretty cool solution. It definitely is a big, kind of gives you that eerie big brother feeling, but some companies are looking at that because they need to understand. And I say lastly, work with legals. Legal is getting to the point where they don't want extra copies of data floating around. It just causes more risk exposure for them from a lawsuit standpoint. So getting them on your side, and so that they can kind of help you put the hammer down if someone's wanting to copy a database out to yet another server, to kind of help prevent some of that stuff. So data retention is becoming more and more key in the legal areas too.
Anybody else? I'm sure healthcare guy, you might even have a comment around partners too.
Gosh, when this will get more complex, I don't think in healthcare, we share data with everybody. Well, not everybody, but most everybody. But I will start off to say solid inventory and solid registry processes on where your information is at. So there's got to be some type of mechanism to figure out where's your data at, and then register those data sources in a way you can effectively manage it, and then where that data is moving in and out of your network. And that includes tying together through third-party assurance approaches where you're linking it back to registered data sources in your environment. So the idea is that if you have a third-party relationship come in and you need to ship data off in there in some type of data exchange, that it's going to tie directly back through registry into your data sources that you originally registered. right? So there's going to be a clear linkage on that data flow and who owns that data flow, the ownership of that, as well as the life cycle over time. Now, chasing around data in your environment, there's a lot of bulky solutions out there, like data loss prevention systems that can be very helpful. But in healthcare systems that are very complex, they're unwieldy and almost impossible to manage. We found that number one is kind of raising the bar, if you will, or the requirements around data about where it's put is a nice kind of stopping point for folks on whether or not they're going to decide to copy another database, because it's going to be another part of the audit cycle, right? In other words, the cost to them from a resource perspective, anytime they replicate data, is going to go up. That's going to impact resources, application resources, and all those type of things that come into play. Makes them think differently internally on how they're going to manage resources. So kind of raising the cost bar, that's probably a better way of saying it, in your environment for when they're moving data around or replicating data is very helpful.
And then kind of the technology side, I think Parachute alluded to is that, you know, no matter what, if you look at the DLP solutions, data loss prevention, data leakage prevention, whatever, have their limitations. And, you know, this question is more of a broad question. Have any of your organizations actually been impressed by a DLP, data protection solution, or a tracking of data throughout your environment?
I'll touch on that, only because I think yes. So we have differing opinions. Is it an end all be all? No. There's certainly gaps that you could find around it, but as far as knowing some of the sensitive data types that are getting moved around, whether it's on endpoints or through email or through non-secure sites, absolutely. I think it's like a lot of the items we've discussed here, where keep it small to begin with. Don't try sticking all kinds of different data analytics out there. I mean, focus on, you know, credit card numbers, socials, or medical patient account numbers, you know, things like that. But yeah, I think you can really shed some light on what's going on in your environment and help drive some of the actions. The biggest thing that I've seen, there's two things I have to throw out with it. One, don't keep this within IT. Typically, if there's something related to, you know, a particular type of data, get the business owners involved. Have the business owners be responsible for overseeing that. You know, there's no reason that the already overtaxed InfoSec or whatever department they have, you know, it's also responsible for trying to figure out if Johnny should be sending out some account number, or if that's even related to an account number. So push that stuff out. And then the other thing, just full side note, is if you start pulling in technologies like this, especially ones that are pulling in credit cards, stuff like that, they can be great for alerting, but just keep in mind they also become in scope for your PCI.
So one of the things that we did to kind of narrow down our DLP solution, get it where it's much more actionable, is we started linking it to we have an identity kind of risk analytics system that provides us outlier-based behaviors around access and activity. And so when we have activity going on in our environment across core systems, DLP events also are correlated with that. That helps us give us more context and more actionable information, especially as you look at a path a user takes in the environment. It becomes much more intuitive and actionable. Otherwise, sometimes you get a DLP event, you're going to be running around tracking it down, figuring out what path it took and why it took that path in many cases. So aligning it a little bit better with and correlating it with other tools that can make it much more actionable in a quicker fashion is a very helpful approach for DLP projects.
I'm curious on the DLP. Have you had any legal issues where if you have it in monitoring mode but not enforcement mode, and say you're seeing employees do shopping or going to websites they absolutely shouldn't be, and you don't do anything about it, can you be held legally liable where they say by knowing about it and not acting, you're now condone, you're now accepting the behavior? Or have you ever seen that scenario with DLP?
We haven't seen that at all, so that's a pretty good perspective, but I haven't seen that.
The only thing I can add to it is, because my former company being global is from the European standpoint, so some of the European privacy laws. Now, I haven't experienced anything where we were sued because we didn't report that or anything like that. But with any of these types of technologies, the European councils or workers' council approvals that you have to go through is quite strenuous because of the privacy laws there. So that's sort of a hurdle that you have to get over through multiple meetings about how are you going to use it, can you obfuscate who the user is, do you have a process to identify the user once you see something, all those sorts of things.
So yeah, I think it can definitely be a problem. It's almost like, again, if you create a policy and you're not prepared to enforce it or do anything with it, it's worse to have the policy once you put it in writing. So again, I strongly reinforce the need to have legal and HR and others outside of IT, and then also again to have some of those groups do some of the monitoring, alerting on that. And you can customize these things to send email or whatever. I mean, but they need to have a little safety.
Okay, we're going to actually open up to maybe 2 questions, and then we'll start the process of handing out the pieces. Does anybody have any questions for the CISOs, just in a broad sense, in general?
Hey guys, the subject of things like the iCloud backup, the Dropbox crash plan that do workstation backups, that kind of creates a whole sort of new dimension of DLP issues and just data ownership and all of that when it comes into your forensics or assessments. Who owns the iTunes backup? Is it a company or is it an individual? Any color to add on that, or any experience you've dealt with in that space to share?
I'll just add real quick that, I mean, there's technologies also that you can get, and it'll tell you what all cloud, service types your employees are using, things like that. So there's a lot of different solutions, and I won't turn it into a propeller head conversation, which I'd like to. So I think ultimately my prediction is, the old giant curse or whatever, is we all are going to need to move towards a BYOD type approach. That is, we're going to keep facing that. We're going to want to protect the data, protect the systems, let people have their own devices so they can continue doing those type of things.
So it's a good point. And I don't have an answer for it. I think that the mobility space, the BYOD space, is still a very immature piece to all of this and what we do with it. I mean, you love Apple as a user and you hate them as a security guy. They won't let you into their APIs and all that stuff. So I think this is a space where people are still struggling with it, right? We're just kind of allowing it, letting it, hoping that, putting whatever controls we can on it, but I don't think we have a solution for it. So, and I think it's still it's a space that still needs improvement.
Okay, one last quick question, if possible, and then we'll close it out and give away goodies. In the back, probably just stand up.
When you go to the board or when CEO trying to justify your budget, do you ever, is there an industry benchmark, say, security spend as a percentage of revenue you can throw out there and hey, you run behind, you need to up?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen anywhere from 3 to 5% of the IT budget is typically what I've seen. When I'm having those discussions, I actually try to stay away from that benchmark, just simply because there's too many other variables. There are some companies that are more risk averse. There are some that are on the opposite side, right? So I think you have to understand where your company sits as far as a risk assumption, and that's what you play on, right? So yes, are there some benchmarks and some things that you can throw out? Yes, but I try to stay away from them because my discussion is more about this is what you've told me that you're concerned about from a risk perspective, and this is how I'm going to go with it.
Well, I'll just throw out, I mean, similar, there's, you need to make sure you're looking at, are you looking at like functions when you see those studies too? Does the other group have compliance? Does it have DR planning? Does it have identity management, you know, the operations piece? So make sure you look at those things, but absolutely, lots of studies out there to see. And then, again, I think it's worthwhile. You need to have something to compare to and make sure you're differentiating, obviously, between your capital expenditures versus your operations.
All right, well, I was going to actually close it out, if that's okay.
They want the free stuff now.
Yeah, they want the free stuff now. Just first off, I wanted to thank our CISOs for actually attending. I mean, it's really impressive to actually hear their thoughts on a lot of the things that we probably deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I really appreciate everybody's time and putting your time and your effort in actually educating and creating awareness within our organization. So,